Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mind, Body, and Roots. I have got the lovely George Hariri. He is the owner, I believe, of the Shared Practices company. He does so much more. And honestly, I was kind of shocked to get an email from him when he asked to be on the podcast, but I will let him talk about his journey, and I look forward to learning from him, as I hope you do as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll edit. I'm one of the owners. So Shared Practices has a group of partners, and I'm one of them. So yeah, maybe Ahad, is it okay if I kind of just get into my story and then kind of go from
Absolutely.
there?
Go
Yeah,
right ahead.
so
Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
my mom's a dentist, and so I grew up sort of like dentist's son, and that was a lot of time spent like in my teenage years. I spent time sterilizing instruments in the office. I sort of like I grew up around the office. It was always like we swing by the office to do stuff, and that was a big part of my childhood. But really kind of a turning point for me was when I was 8 years old. I fell and had a kind of vertical root fracture on number 10.
Hmm.
And so I ended up seeing the endodontist twice for a treat and then a retreat. And then I ended up going to the oral surgeon to take multiple teeth out, but that was one of them. Then I had a canine replacement with the orthodontist. So by the time I was like in my early teenage years, I had already been to most of the dental specialists. And that was a pretty formative experience for me because, I went in, like referring dentist kid. Like they're really nice to me. They take the time. So I felt like these guys, the endodontist, the oral surgeon, the orthodontist, like they became like friends, and uh, I think that experience combined with just a lifelong love for business. And I think for me, like, always just like the game of business was always very interesting to me. And so, I went into my undergrad and I told my parents, like, I wanted to study business. And my parents, they're immigrants and they come from another country. And so, the immigrant kind of way is, like doctor or dentist was sort of like they like to prescribe options that are acceptable career paths to their kids. And so for me, it was doctor or dentist. And I'm like, okay, well, my mom's a dentist. I had this accident when I was a kid. And also dentists are typically more entrepreneurial, so like that was how I wanted to go. So then I get into dental school, and when I started dental school, I kind of had a very interesting sort of turn. Like I'm a very driven person, and I've always like to set long-term goals. And so like I don't like to take on something for 6 or 12 months. I like to take on something for 3 or 4 years. And so when I started dental school, I'm like, what am I going to take on for 3 or 4 years? And so then, I was like, do I want to be an oral surgeon? Do I want to, go do endo? What do I want to do? And I read a few interesting articles. One talked about how consolidation and the wave of consolidation was really happening in dentistry. And this is like 2014. So like this is 12 years ago. So it's like it's been a while. So, now we're a little bit further ahead in that curve. And the other thing that I read was that in industries, there's an 80-20 rule. And so in medicine, 80% of the providers are specialists and 20% are primary care providers. And so when you look at legislation and change, it's going to favor that 80%. So you can see the primary care providers in medicine have kind of been left behind a bit in some of the changes with nurse practitioners and PAs coming to lower the value of what they do. In dentistry, it's the opposite. 80% plus are general practitioners and 20% are specialists. And then that 20% is fragmented amongst like 7 or 8 different types of specialties. And so I kind of like went into some of this like macro trend research in my first month of dental school. I'm doing all of this research. And I kind of came to the conclusion that I wanted to specialize in business. Because consolidation is happening. It made sense to be a GP, but I wanted to have some level of specialization, so I decided to specialize in business. So then I go to like the Wharton School and I download their syllabuses, I buy textbooks, and I just decided I'm going to dedicate 4 years of dental school to studying business. And what that looked like for the first year was just like kind of absorbing a lot of information. And then I kind of got bored and I was like, I want to start like applying things. So then I started like connecting with dentists on Dentaltown. Anytime somebody would post on Dentaltown saying that they're looking at an acquisition opportunity, I like would reach out to them and offer to do a free analysis and like just look at a practice and give them my thoughts. And it got to the point where I was doing like 2 or 3 of those a week. And I was like looking at all these potential acquisition opportunities. I was advising people for free, and they're like, who is this dental student who's like kind of weird and reaching out to me offering to help? Okay, like maybe half the time they'd say yes. And through all of that, I ended up developing like this spreadsheet that I use. So I had the spreadsheet every time I would get the information, I'd plug it in, then I would send it back to them. And I told some of my friends about this. And one of my friends was Richard Lowe, who was starting the Shared Practices podcast. And so it's like on the second episode of the podcast, one of the guys who I helped was telling the story of how he got into ownership. And he was like, there's this guy who's like a D2 who like helped me look at a bunch of offices and mentioned my name. And then Richard reaches out and is like, hey, can I have that spreadsheet? So then I gave him the spreadsheet. But at the bottom of the spreadsheet, I put, for like free analysis and consultation, contact George Hariri. And I like put my name on it. So then there's all these people that are listening to the Shared Practices podcast, downloading my spreadsheet and reaching out to me for questions. And so like for the first 8 months of the podcast, I kind of became like a friend of the show. And I never was on it, but it was just like these people would reach out to me because I supplied the spreadsheet. And Richard and I had developed a bit of a friendship at that point. And he needed somebody to come and like his residency, he was in an army residency, he was doing the podcast, and his family life was required. He had 2 little kids. And so the kind of the famous line in our world is, he always says like his wife asked him to, residency, podcast, family, pick two. And that really meant that he had to pick between his residency and the podcast. And I kind of became the third option, which was like, maybe George will take over the work of the podcast. I can keep doing it and I'll have more time for having better balance in my life. And so that's the story of how I got to be a part of Shared Practices. And when I told Richard on like our very first calls, I was like, like you have this podcast, it's nice, but like I personally am not a big fan of the podcast. It's not dense enough for me. And so like I kind of wanted to provide a I kind of came with a different flavor where I wanted to be a little bit more deep. I wanted to go into more technical stuff. I wanted to talk in more detail. And also, I wanted to grow a business on the back of the podcast. And so then, that was in 2017. And then over the course of like 5 years, we went from doing online education to doing consulting. And then we brought in a third partner, Matt Garino. And then we went to start a DSO. We brought in 3 more partners, so then there was 6 in total. And then we started Shared Practices Group at the beginning of 2022, and that like really took over our business. Now it's to the point where when you look at our revenue this year, it's going to be like over 95% of it is going to come from the DSO. So like we're very heavily DSO now. So it's like Shared Practices started as a practice management podcast, then helped dentists get into practice ownership. Then we kind of had our own ideas on, we call it dental moneyball, like analytics-based practice management, growing through like very precise pre-described pathways. And then after that, we went into the implant business, and I think we're the third full arch provider in the country. I'm not totally sure on that, but I know that we're the most scaled platform that is general practitioners doing full arch, which is sort of our spin on it. Is we take a general practitioner who doesn't have experience full arch, and then we train them up on full arch. And so that's sort of my career in a nutshell. And I think for me, like the consistent theme that sort of connects all the dots is I just love the business of dentistry. I kind of view that as my craft, right? It's dental practice management. So, kind of along the way, I wrote one book called Dental Moneyball that came out in 2023, which is all about how to grow a practice using a data-driven approach. And then I'm in the process right now of writing another book called Dental Moneyball Zero, which is all about practice acquisitions, how to get into ownership. So yeah, I think that's sort of a complete overview of my journey so far.
Fair. I mean, honestly, George, like I just feel like you had a plan and then you just executed it, which is awesome. Like a lot of people, like they say they're gonna do a lot of things, and this is just in general, but a lot of them just don't execute. But you like were like, hey, I'm gonna go download Wharton, like the business school, the curriculum, learn it, still do dentistry on the side, but just master and hone that craft of business. And that in itself is just a testament to how like disciplined you are on like once you set a goal, you're gonna go get it. Which, trust me, that's not an easy thing to do. Like, especially with the distraction of dental school.
Yeah, and I think that when I'm succinctly describing the last 12 years, it's going to sound like it was very intentional.
Okay.
But I would say that it was more like I had a general direction of where I wanted to go, which was just more and more business. And I was just like kind of wandering through the forest. And I just like every step was just towards more business. And like that's the only thing I really knew that I was doing is just making my career more business oriented. But like I mean, there's all kinds of like there was so many moments in between where I had no clue what I was doing, and I was just kind of wandering around aimlessly. And so I think that yeah, maybe when you kind of describe 12 years in 8 minutes, it's going to sound like that, but I don't think that's the true experience of what it was like.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You know, it takes. I think when you look back at everything, when you describe it in 8 minutes, like you said, it does seem like that, but it is definitely over a decade of stuff happening, which is well, that's life for you, right?
Yeah.
That's
And
pretty
and
much it.
maybe let me introduce a couple of stories in there just to kind of like humanize the experience a bit. So like when I first got into practice ownership, I talk about the story in Dental Moneyball. Is when I first got into practice ownership, I bought this office with a husband and wife seller team. And so I'm
Hmm.
thinking like I'm buying this two dentist practice. So you think there's two dentists there, I'm going to put two dentists. But the problem was like the patient base, the staff size, like everything was really for one dentist. And I didn't know that. And so like I did really well in my first 6 months because I walked in, I handed the hygienist intraoral cameras, and like we diagnosed, we treatment planned, and a lot of my work was on existing patients. There was a lot of cracked amalgams, and my sellers didn't treat them the way that I did. So like my schedule was very busy. I was making really good money, and then like all of a sudden, like once that 6 months pass and I've seen all of those patients, all of a sudden my diagnosis drops off of a cliff because now I've told everyone what I see, and now they're just my existing and recurring patients. And so then my practice tanked. And then for the next 7 months, I made no money. So like imagine, you're working 4 days a week, seeing patients full time, and you're either making no money or losing money every given month. And so it's like, there was a window there in the middle there. I call it like that was probably like one of the hardest points in my career because at the time I was already on the Shared Practices podcast. So I'm here giving dentist business advice. All the while I'm working 4 days a week and not making any money, which is completely different than an associateship, right? An associateship, you're at least making money. And so I had that moment, and then I had like my so then that was one kind of challenge, and the way that I overcame that was I figured out how to grow my practice so that I could have enough revenue to have profit. And I write about that in Dental Moneyball. And then like the second thing was COVID happened, and I had a terrible 2019, and then like I finally figure out how to grow my practice. I'm finally set to make some money, and then they tell me to close down the office. So then I'm pissed, and I take a month off, and then I realize with the month off, I'm like, wow, I really enjoyed focusing on the business and not seeing patients. And like, I really enjoyed that month off. So then I went back into the office and I put out an ad to hire a dentist to replace me, and I had a dentist come in and start. And I sat my team down and I said, George, the owner, is going to fire George, the dentist. And George, the owner, is going to stay the owner, but George is no longer going to be the dentist here. And I kind of just explained that to my team. And then, I had an assistant ask me, she's like, what are you going to do with yourself and your time? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know. Like, and, maybe for like the first 6 weeks, I just golfed. Like, I golfed like 3, 4 days a week. And then I like kind of figured it out. Then I found about the dentures and implants thing, and then I kind of got going. So it's like in between the story, there are all these periods of time where I was sort of lost or not knowing what to do, and kind of just found my way. So yeah, I don't want it to sound like I had this perfect plan and I just went every day execute. Like it was, there's a whole lot of like meandering and not knowing what I'm doing and failing and all of that stuff in between.
You're what? How old are you? Like 39, 40, maybe? I don't know your age.
I'm 32 right now, about to turn 33.
Well, yeah, there you go. Like you're not much older than most people. Actually, you're only about a year older than me, which is kind of wild. But hey, man, good for you. But dude, at that age, let's think about it. Like, so say someone graduated in 22 or like my year,
Yeah.
most of us are associates, right?
Uh
You're
huh.
living a life that most of us are like, wow, that's impressive, man. So like, what was that turning point for you that you were like, hey, I like dentistry. I mean, I know you're talking about business, but it's not for me and I'd rather hire someone to do the work and I just sit back as an owner. Like, what was that key turning point for you
Yeah.
besides both?
So like I'm gonna speak openly about this, and I
Okay.
understand that I'm probably not going to look good in doing that. And so when I was a first year dental student, I made that decision that I wanted to focus on business. And then like by the time I was a D2, like I understood what EBITDA was, and I understood that like if you have a practice doing 2 million a year, that practice should kick off around $400,000 of profit to the owner of that practice before they pay the bank. So then if you pay the bank maybe 150 grand, you're taking home 250 pre-tax. Like, you can make good money not being a dentist. So like by the time I was a D2 and I was like in sim clinic late at night with cutting preps and getting frustrated, I kind of was like, there's going to be a day that I'm not doing this. And so I had that awareness as early as my D2 year. And then I got into clinic and I fell in love with it. Like I
Mhm.
totally fell in love with the act of improving clinical dentistry. And so then I had that thought as a D2 and then I think it kind of escaped me. And once I got into clinic and I started seeing patients and I started to get my hands wet, I really fell in love with the clinical dentistry. And so I think that thought escaped me for a few years. And then I got into ownership and it was chaotic. And so like if you think about it, right, if I'm working 4 days a week, not making any money, doing a ton of clinical dentistry, like I'm doing 50 grand a month of clinical dentistry and I'm not making any money. Like if you're doing that, you're not thinking like, oh, I'm going to be absentee and I'm not going to see patients. Like you're like that. I would lose 20 grand a month if I did that. So it's like I can't do that. So I think the thought escaped me until COVID. So I would say like my D2 year was the first time I had this aspiration, and then I would say I got into clinic, and for like 3 or 4 years, I sort of put my head down. And I would actually say, I have an assistant who's worked with me, my whole career. Like she was a lead DA when I took over the office. She was my number one chairside assistant. I sent her back to school to become an expanded function assistant. And, when I said that George, the owner's firing George, the dentist, I gave my team like 90 days notice. So like they
Mhm.
knew for 3 months that I was on my way out. They knew I was looking to hire somebody. I communicated early. And so my assistant pulled me aside one day and she's like, it's a real shame that you're not going to do this anymore. She's like, I think you're a great dentist and I think that you have a great rapport with patients. And I've worked with a lot of dentists and I think you're really good. And she was like, she gave me like kind of like a bit of a talk about how like I'm good at this. Patients get a good experience. And, like my whole thing was anxiety. I loved helping patients with dental anxiety. And I
Mhm.
loved being calm and managing them through a visit and giving clear expectations. And I was really fast. That was like kind of my thing. They called me Speedy Gonzalez in the office because like I just did the same thing every time, the same way. And like I just loved the system of it. And so, like, I do think that I spent those 3 to 4 years to really get. I think it takes 2 years out of school before you really feel like you get a handle on like being a dentist. And I did take those 2 years. My clinical career post graduation was 2 years long. And I do feel like I reached a level of proficiency of being a general dentist. And then COVID was like the big switch for me where it's like they forced me to take time off, and then like I went hiking and I did all this other stuff, and then I was at home working on my computer doing things for shared practices, and I was like, I like this is nice. And then that was like I kind of reminded myself what I wanted. And so I think that if it hadn't been for COVID, maybe I'm still like multiple years like later still being, still practicing. But I think at some point I would have reached that same conclusion because, for me, it was all about, can I fund my lifestyle not doing clinical dentistry? Once the math turned to the point where I could bring in an associate and then the practice kicked off enough cash that I could pay my bills, like I was pretty set on that. So I think that was, I was in around 2020 that happened. But, so I think I probably would have ended up doing that. But yeah, I definitely had a few years where I forgot about that.
Very cool. Very cool. So if someone is in your shoes, or
Yeah.
yeah, let's just say your shoes or my shoes, because you and I are pretty much similar in age wise, what advice would you give them to become more in control of their time and not do clinical dentistry, even if they loved clinical dentistry or do still love clinical dentistry?
Yeah. So I think that you can hear my story and you can maybe take the wrong message. Like,
Mhm.
I think that everyone needs to find, where does dentistry intersect with their passion? Like
Mm.
dentistry is such a broad, it's a $170 billion a year industry, by the way. So that means you take the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, every single major sports league, you add up all of the economic activity that all of them bring and you multiply it, and then you get to the size of dentistry in the United States. So like it's the massive economic opportunity, right? So you ask yourself, what part of that pie am I interested in? Do I like kids? Do I like sedation? Do I like surgery? Do I like ortho? Do I like cosmetics? Do I like pathology? Do I like radiology? Do I like like there's so many different ways to skin the cat. And so I think that you can say like, oh, this guy George doesn't see patients, he's kind of brash, he whatever, all the things you might be able to say. And it's like, okay, I think the message really is George is the type of person who found his passion, which is business, and found a way to marry that with his career of in dentistry. And I use my, like, people say like, do you feel like all that time that you spent going to school was wasted? I'm like, no, I use my degree all the time. I just don't use it with my two hands seeing patients. I use it with my knowledge and with my ability to relate to dentists and my ability to know what it's like to be a dentist and, you know, all of the different things. And so I think that the question needs to begin internally is like, what is the thing that, like, for me, right? You said like, oh, it looks like you had a plan, you followed your plan. It's like I really just knew what my passion was the whole time. My passion was business, and every turn I had a decision to make between going one way or another way, I just went towards my passion every time, and I just kept picking it. And so I think that for anyone out there listening, if you identify that passion that you have or the things that you're passionate about, then every career decision you make in dentistry should inch you a little bit more towards where you're interested. And so, like, that's the advice that I would suggest, because I would say most dentists actually don't think like me. Most dentists like love like surgery or cosmetics, or like there's usually a niche that they like, or they like, you know, maybe some like they just like to be efficient, they like to, you know, they like the rapport, right? So I would kind of encourage everyone listening to like spend some time thinking through your, you know, and then, you know, one of the things that you can say is like, it's always easiest to connect the dots looking backwards. So if you look at your entire career from the first year of dental school all the way until today, think about all of your favorite things that you've ever done and you write them all down. And you're like, what's the common thread? What is the thing that connects these things to each other? And you're like, that's what I like. And then now you know how to make decisions moving forward. And, you know, if you keep choosing that thing for a period of time, you will come a point where people will look at you and be like, wow, that person does a ton of surgery. They've really advanced themselves surgically. Like, how'd you do that? It's like, well, I just knew I liked surgery. And every time I had a decision, I just picked one that led to more surgery. And then eventually I'm now doing, you know, FP1s or FP3s, and I'm doing all these crazy cases. And like, you know, that's how you get there. But you don't like, I think it's just more about finding your passion within the field and then making repeated decisions that continue to choose that passion. And then you do that for a long period of time, and then you make significant progress.
That is that is very helpful. And like you said, I think there are people out here that will take your message or, you know, in general, any message wrong because they just see, hey, this is what one person said. But I think the key thing here is that you spent the time and reflected on it.
Yeah.
And then upon that reflection, you're like, George, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm going to hone in on, and that's how I'm going to execute it. And that's with any successful person, right? Like if you take the time to reflect on it, like you can hear 1,000 things. Like, hey, you could hear your dental school instructor or your mentors or your friends, and if you just act on that, I think that's you being kind of silly. You're not thinking about it. But
Yeah.
if you take their advice and you use your own knowledge and you kind of like make it like an Italian tailored suit in a way,
Mhm.
and you execute on that Italian tailored suit, you will figure everything out. It'll make sense. And like you said, it'll allow you to connect the dots looking backwards.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah, you nailed it. And I think like the worst thing is, you know, people love to be like, you know, they love to give people advice, right? You ask someone for advice, they'll love to tell you their opinion. And it's like, that's your opinion on what I should do, which is not nearly as important as my desires and opinions about what I should do, right? So it's like, that's where it's like, at the end of the day, the purpose of a career is to bring fulfillment and financial security. Like, those are the two things that you should really be going for. And so it's like, I don't know what brings you fulfillment. So who am I to say what other people should be doing? Like, they should initiate what brings them fulfillment, and then maybe I can help them find a way for that to make money. But like, you know, like it's kind of like that in dentistry, you can make money any which way. There's a huge economic opportunity here. So I think it's just one of those things that, yeah, I wish that people would spend more time thinking about themselves and what ticks their, you know, what makes them go and what gives them energy and excitement and fulfillment, and then, you know, use that to make their decisions.
Okay, fair. So my follow-up question to that is, in considering your entire journey, is there anything you regret or you would change about your journey thus far?
Yeah, it's really hard to answer that question because obviously I have tons of regrets. I've lost lots of money. So like I've made many decisions that have cost me six figures. Like literally I have made multiple six-figure mistakes, a handful of them. right? So it's like obviously I'd love to have those back, but the tuition, right? Like it's you learn from those experiences, and it's like sure maybe I'd like to like undo some of the bad guys, but at the same time the lessons that the bad guys taught me, like that makes me who I am today, and that's part of so it's tough to say that, but I would say that if I had to say one regret, it's say that the common theme, and it's funny that you're going to hear me say this, but like I don't think I was even clear enough on who I am and what I value. And I think that, I just didn't make all of my decisions from that place of the true alignment with who I am and what my values are. And I think that throughout my career, I sometimes have gotten lost in the objective of like trying to get this much growth or trying to do this or trying to do that. And then I sometimes have had to make decisions that compromise sort of who I am and what I like to accomplish what I want to accomplish. And I think that I sometimes have been very like blinders on with my goals and maybe wasn't as cognizant of like if you can't get there in a way that preserves all of your values and aligns like who you are and what you want, then get there slower, or like, those types of things. And I think that that would be like the one thing that I would say, like, I probably didn't. It's funny because I'm talking about how important it is to be introspective. And I think that my regret is I wasn't introspective enough. And I think that, like, I look back at several decisions that I've made and I'm like, yeah, that wasn't really me being very clear on who I am and what I value. And, that's just part of it. So, yeah, I think that's probably the best I can do.
Hey, I appreciate the candor. It's like even admitting that that's hard to do. So, George, if you were to go back to your younger self, like just
Yeah.
reflecting back on that, would you change anything that led you on the path to dental school? Would there be maybe would you have done a business school first,
No,
just out of formality's sake or anything like that? Or would you have changed your journey or done anything differently than the way you did it looking back now?
no, honestly not. It's tough because I prioritize speed. So like I
Okay.
did college in 3 years. I got into school right away. I kind of just like prioritized from the time I was 18. It was
Mhm.
really become a dentist as young as I can. And so like I feel like I graduated at 25. So I feel like I did pretty good at that objective. And I think that once I became a dentist, then my opportunities opened up. And so like it's hard for me to say that I would go back to business school because that probably would have delayed me becoming a dentist by 1 or 2 years. And candidly, I don't think like my wife did an MBA program last year, and I actually got to kind of do a pillow MBA where I like watch my wife do an MBA. Like I think I learned a lot of really good stuff. I don't necessarily I think that you develop instincts, and I think that my instincts were directionally accurate for what is like best business practices. So I think like yeah, I don't know. I don't have many regrets. I'm pretty pleased with how things have gone, and I haven't talked about this yet. So I actually transitioned to the CFO role. So that's like my day to day since 2022. So like that was another decision I made that was more business, right? It's like finance and becoming fluent in the financial world and understanding because when I was an entrepreneur operator before I became an executive as part of our DSO, I was very focused on growth, revenue growth, and I wasn't as disciplined with my costs. And I felt like for me, that was a bit of a weakness. And I felt like that was another decision that was just more business, right? So I think that even that decision I look back on, I say that like the skills that I've gained being a CFO for multiple years now have been really valuable to me. So yeah, I also think that no, yeah, I don't have many regrets. Yeah,
Okay. Fair. Hey man, I that's a good thing
and
because
I've made tons of mistakes, lost tons of money, and I'm sitting here saying I'd do it all again, which is kind of torturous. But they make you
well,
better.
they do. And so there's a book, I don't know if you like to read. But I love to read. I'm a big reader. But there's a book out there called Solve for Happy by Mo Gaudat. He's also I believe he's Egyptian, I believe. I could be wrong.
Okay.
But he was the Google X CEO, like so the AI and future technology CEO for like 20 plus years. And he ran like the Middle Eastern division and like the whole kid and caboodle. Like he was very well known, multimillionaire. And he was like the whole point of the book was how can I be happy? Because I have all this money. He lost his son at like 20 years old. I mean, so much happened in his life, but he just couldn't figure out. He's like, I have everything I want in this world, but I can't be happy. And then they ended up doing a study at Google, and the big question was, does he regret any of his like, journey? And he obviously had parts of it, but in that study, they had other people, subjects, and like variables. And the conclusion of the study was that basically, if you forgot all of the mistakes and regrets you made, you would be less of a evolved human essentially. Like you just
Yeah.
wouldn't have like the knowledge moving forward. So like they'd ask subjects, be like, hey, for example, your girlfriend broke up with you, who's supposed to be your wife, and all this stuff. If we had a button, like a electric shocker to remove that knowledge from you, would you take it? And 97% of the correspondents or the subjects in that test were like, no, we wouldn't. Because we want to go through that pain so that the way we end up, their final version, where they were in that subject, they actually ended up being better because of that.
That's amazing. Yeah. So I actually have two kind of counter stories to this one. So one is Native Americans historically prayed for very difficult lives so that they
Hmm.
grew and became better as a result. That's one. And the second one is NVIDIA,
Yeah.
Jensen Huang, like he's awesome. He talked about how he wishes all entrepreneurs tons of challenges and struggles and roadblocks because that's how you become really good at what you do and that's how you become great. And so yeah, I think it's totally just part of it, right? It's like the human condition is life is supposed to be full of challenges so that you experience those challenges and then become better as a result of them and evolve and progress and continue to grow. And yeah, so I very much am aligned with that philosophy.
Yeah, it's cool. It's just interesting to talk about. Anyways, George, let's move on to the next segment. So, how do you keep fit? Whether that's mentally, physically, spiritually, what do you do? Hey, man, you could be totally blunt here and be like, "Hey, I don't do any of that," and that's something I need to work on. So you totally can go either way.
Yeah, no, I'm very fortunate to say that I am currently probably in the best shape of my life. And so that's only because I historically have not been in good shape. So like I was a chubby teenager, got even fatter in college. Like by the time I was like a dentist, I had like a pretty noticeable and large belly. And then yeah, definitely had like a change in mentality. And that was 7 years ago now. And so, I think for me, it really started with diet, and then I evolved to become much more into fitness. But like, I am a lazy person at heart. Like, I do not like exercise. I like that's a struggle for me. It's not something I like. I'm not like one of those people that loves going to the gym and lifting weights. That's not me. And what has really gotten me there is basketball. So like I love basketball and it's like the one thing that like can get me running. And so, when I did this seminar or it's like workshop about positive intelligence. And one of the principles of positive intelligence is this idea of self-actualization, which is like you in growth and in self-development, you are becoming the truest and best version of yourself. And so I decided at 28, which was now 4-ish years ago, a little more than 4 years ago now, I was like, I want to be really good at basketball because I kind of gave up on basketball. I didn't really like play it a whole lot. I just like was focused on school. And now I'm in a different place in my life where I need to kind of focus on my body. And so I really want to focus on basketball. And so like I take basketball very seriously. Like I was training this morning and like I just that's kind of how I stay. That's how I get my cardio and my exercise and like my calories or whatever, just like the burning calories in. And then I do lift weights. And that for me, honestly, is a chore. And I use the Atomic Habits framework where it's like I do it every other day. If I skip 2 days, then I for sure do it on that day. And I'll do a half attempt just to stay on track. And, like I'll set goals. Like this year, my goal is to do a muscle up, which is like clearly not happening. And that's tough, by the way. And so like I just try to stay engaged, but the way I look at it is, when you're in your 30s, like the human body starts to decline at 40. And so you kind of have like this window of time to get to a peak before you start to decline. And like every human around 40 faces very real physical challenges. And so like when I turned 30, that was like kind of every time a decade birthday happens, you think about it. And the thought that I had when I turned 30 is like, okay, I really need to focus on my body. I haven't focused on it to date. And by the time I get 40, then I'm on the decline. So like I better build up as much of a base as I can so that I have a good place to start from as I start getting worse. And so like I think that I'm definitely really into the longevity mindset. I don't think I'm like in the cold tub or doing all the stuff that the longevity people say to do. But like, I definitely like the mindset of longevity. And so I kind of view myself in like my becoming the, so like right now, I think I'm in the best shape, but that's not because I'm like in amazing shape. It's because I was in poor shape. And then like, I think each year I hope to get a little bit more fit until my 40s, and then I just try to hold on. So like that's kind of my mentality about body.
Hey, dude, I'm like that. I totally understand that. Like, I'm a little bit opposite of you. I'm a diehard gym person.
Oh, really?
I love the gym, man. Like, it's like I gotta go, but I got sick this last week and Ramadan started. I don't know
Yeah.
if you, dude, it's been so bad because I even work out during Ramadan, but I travel about an hour for work and I travel 1 hour back. They let us out early, but still, man, like it's been such a doozy for me. And then I got sick, and my wife's like, "Yeah, you're not working out." She's like, this is you taking a break." Because I go 5 6 times a week. I go for runs in the morning. I do doubles. I go for a run in the morning.
Jeez.
That's just how I am, man. Like I'm just
Good
wired
for
because
you.
I think it's because my dad, to be
Yeah.
honest, like he's done it for so long, so I just watched him. But this week and a half that I haven't worked out, it's been the most hardest break for me. And I'm just like my body feels like it's rotting away and I'm like
Yeah.
losing my discipline. But I can't do anything. It's like I'm on rest. I'm like I just can't. So it's interesting that like how you said it's like we're totally different opposites, but at the end of the day, we both like love longevity. Like we know that hey, that third decade of our lives is like that last decade before we can get incredibly in shape, and then we start degrading.
Yeah. And like, I'll be honest, like, I'll tell us, maybe like it's really easy for the person who thinks like you and is like you to do this because it's energy positive, right? Like,
Yeah.
when you work out, you get that wind back. Like, there's this other group of people, like myself and maybe others, who like it's an energy, you're like, no. And then it's like, even when you do it, you don't get this, like, that was awesome. I feel so good. You're like, thank goodness it's done. And then like that's candidly how like basketball doesn't feel like that, but lifting weights and doing pretty much anything else fitness wise does feel like that. And so I heard this advice, and it was like one of the best pieces of advice I'd heard, which is just go to the gym and enjoy it, and just get in the habit of liking going to the gym. So what I did for like a month, and people are going to like laugh at this, I went to the gym and I would just go to the sauna in the steam room, and then I'd leave because that's what I liked. I liked just sitting there doing nothing. So I would go to the gym and sit there and do nothing, and then I'd leave. And then all of a sudden I saw the basketball court and I'm like, okay, let me shoot a bit. And I was like, wow, I like this. So then it was like, I actually got started just going to the gym and like enjoying it. And then I just found something I enjoyed, which is basketball. And then I kept going back. But like, the thing that I would encourage people to do is, if you're like me and you can relate to the struggle of not enjoying it, just go do anything you enjoy, even if it's not even exercise. And then even just going there, you'll eventually find something that's exercise related that you enjoy. Like, that's how I did it. And so like, yeah, I don't know. This is like the like I don't know if anyone's getting value from this, but like from my perspective, that's how I tackled it.
To each their own. I mean, at the end of the day, it's what works, and that's the biggest thing. And like, listen, as someone that's been going to the gym for a decade, man, there are more days that I'm like, "Ah, shoot, I gotta do this again." Like, I'm telling you, I love lifting and it gives me energy, but there are days where, and you can ask any avid lifter that there are days where like, "Ah, I gotta go do this again." Like, there are 100% days like that, but I think it's just that discipline and that you've been doing it for so long that you're just like, it's part of the routine. I gotta do it, and it just gives you energy.
Yeah, and Atomic Habits, like that book's like one of the best sellers out there. Like, that book and that concept is super powerful. Like, I adopted that. So I have what I call my 1% compounds. And it's like all of these aspects of my life that I want to have atomic habits that compound positively. And I put body and fitness as one of them, obviously, because it's important. And, I think Warren Buffett has this great saying where he's like, you're given this one vessel to live your entire life in. And you don't get to switch. You can't like get a new body if this one breaks down. Like, you're stuck with this one. So, like, you have to be really diligent about it. And so, like, I think Atomic Habits and that concept really helped me because it's like, it just, I don't really give myself the option to go too long without being in my routine. Like, I skip one day, then I have to do it the next day, and I tell myself that. And so I think that, like you said, like once you get in the habit and the routine of it, and it becomes that like atomic habit in your lifestyle, it's significantly easier to stay on track.
100%. 100%. So, Georgia, now I'd love to switch to the final segment. And this is just about your background, man. So we know you're Lebanese American, but kind of talk to us through like your parents' journey a little bit and like what was it like growing up, as a Lebanese American? And actually, I don't even know where you grew up, like what state you
Yeah,
grew
so
up in.
I
So like,
actually am
kind of tell me about.
Syrian American. So
Ah,
I'm a
Syrian.
Lebanese name, but I'm actually Syrian. Yeah. So
Sorry.
so my dad grew up in Syria. My mom is of Syrian descent, but she grew up in Sudan, Africa. So my mom grew up in Africa. My dad grew up in Syria. They're both Syrian, and my mom is a foreign trained dentist. So she went to dental school in Sudan. Then she moved to the United States. Then she went to dental school at Loma Linda and did their international program and then became a licensed dentist in America. And my dad is a computer engineer. And so he actually studied electrical engineering in Syria, and he got a scholarship to get sent to the States to learn, and then he was supposed to go back. And he got into the States as an electrical engineer, and he heard about this hot field of computers, and he was like, okay, I'm going to do computer engineering. And then the people at the program at the college were like, you don't know anything about computers, like you're an electrical engineer, you hardly speak English, like you can't do this. And he's like, no, I want to do this. And that's the kind of like, that's a bit about my dad. Like he's just kind of pretty hard headed like that. And so yeah. And so then I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, which ironically, I mean, speaking of roots, like I grew up in the El Paso of Arizona, is how I would describe it. It's a border town, highly Hispanic. And so like I grew up speaking Spanish, English, and Arabic. And like I spoke Arabic at home. I spoke English a lot. And then I spoke Spanish with certain kids in my school that didn't speak English. And like I took Spanish classes. And like, for me, I was already bilingual. So like picking up the third language wasn't as challenging as it is for others. And then by the time I was in high school, like I had friends that were like total troublemakers that spoke only Spanish, and like I hang out with them and do entire social interactions in Spanish. And then so like for me, I grew up in a highly Hispanic community, and I didn't really understand a whole lot about like so like I had friends that were from the Midwest or whatever, and then like I have one friend whose family's from Chicago. I have another friend whose family's from Boston. I had another friend whose family was from somewhere else, and I didn't realize that like Chicago and Boston were like very different. And like that was like a thing that it took me candidly until my 20s before I learned that the different parts of America have different behavior. Like there's like one part that's like the South, they speak different, they have different values. Then there's the Midwest, and then there's the Northeast, and then there's the upper Midwest, and like there's all these like nuances. And I kind of grew up in a little Middle Eastern like Hispanic bubble where it was almost like barely the United States, but like not really. And so like my roots, I think in a lot of ways, I kind of like I didn't really realize the country I was living in, I think, until my 20s. I think that's kind of, and I don't know if you can relate, right? You're from Pakistan. Like, you grow up in these like cultural insulated
Mhm.
communities. And so it was like all my friends were Middle Eastern. My parents' friends were Middle Eastern. That was just normal to me. And like it kind of sheltered me from the culture. And I didn't really, I think people who are Middle Eastern to come to the United States generally don't prioritize integration. And so my parents were definitely on the opposite end, where they were prioritizing cultural preservation. And so I think it took me until my 20s to like really understand American culture. Like it's kind of crazy to say that, but like that's definitely part of it.
You and I are on the same boat because I grew up in Pennsylvania, so
Okay.
rural
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, Allentown, which is now like
Oh,
kind of a
Allentown.
it's
Yeah. I
yeah,
know. That's
yeah. So
highly Middle Eastern.
yeah, very a lot of Syrians, a
Yeah, a
lot.
lot of Syrians in
But
Allentown. I have an uncle in
but I
Allentown.
was not. But wait, what? Really?
Yeah, really.
Oh wow, that's crazy. But I didn't grow up on the Syrian part of Allentown. So I grew up in the farmland of Allentown. So
Okay.
I grew up like so. There's Allentown, and then there's like the cities as you go more west. So I grew up there mainly. Like so, Bryansville, which is now very developed, and Orfield is where we moved to later on. And so I was very much sheltered by Pakistani culture. My dad's a doctor, so we all hung out with doctor families. Like very brown culture. I spoke Urdu at home, English at school, Spanish. I would say I'm partially fluent in Spanish. I've gotten rusty because I don't practice it much in the Midwest anymore. But I grew up, learning that in high school and having a lot of Spanish friends in college and so on and so forth. But you and I had very similar journeys, and I didn't realize until I got to college and in dental school, like how different people were. I was like,
Yeah.
what is going on? Like, where has this been my entire life? I made my first couple of Syrian friends in college, and they're like, you didn't know there was a bunch of Syrians in like Whitehall and Allentown? I was like, I have no idea, man. Like, that's crazy. But like, if I
Yeah.
would have known, I would have had a better time. I grew up with mainly like white people thinking that that's what Pennsylvania was, but
Yeah.
it was actually extremely diverse. So I completely understand that sentiment completely. And it took me a long time to be like, wow, I'm actually more normal than I thought I was because I thought I was very isolated.
Yeah. You know, and it's funny is so when I went to dental school, I went to Midwestern Arizona. And when I
Huh.
started at Midwestern Arizona, they were the number one LDS, like Mormon school in the country. And so, like, for me, the big, like, cultural immersion in dental school was like understanding the Mormon culture and religion and like all of that. So, like, the whole American side just kind of blew right over my head because I was like trying to, like, I was like kind of learning about LDS faith and religion and culture. And so, yeah, it honestly was even after dental school for me that it was when I like, so like our partnership, we have, one from Utah and Indiana, the other Arkansas. Then we have, Matt Ford's from the upper Midwest. That was Alex Sharp is from Arkansas. We have Matt Garino from Boston. We have Austin Davis from Tennessee. So it's like in my partnership, that was where I really learned the differences between the different parts of the country. As I got to really work intimately with my American partners, I started to really understand like you behave differently because you're from this part of the country and you're a little like culturally like this because you're in this part of the country. And so it really wasn't until like my mid to late 20s that like this all started to kind of come together for me. And it's crazy that like, and this is very common, right? Immigrants, they're like totally clueless on the country they're living in, right? And I think in my case, first generation American, it was like the blind leading the blind a little bit. And I think that, it took me until doing business with my partners that I really got to understand American culture. So kind of crazy.
That's fair. So, did you have any difficulties growing up where you grew up? And like,
Oh,
I mean, I know you spoke Spanish and all that. Like,
yeah, yeah,
can you
yeah, of
touch on
course,
that a
right?
little
Like,
bit?
yeah, especially after 9/11, right? Like, you had
Yeah.
people calling you like, I think that, yeah, I mean, like, of course, right? Yeah. And I think honestly, I wasn't aware of the difficulties until I was older. So, like, it wasn't until I was in my 20s. Like, obviously, you knew that, like, some people would say some things, but, like, I don't know why. I kind of, like, let it roll off and I never took it seriously. I didn't think they were serious. I thought they were
Mm.
joking when they were being racist and rude. And I was like, oh, like, you're just, like, kidding around. Like, I do that sometimes. Like, okay, and I never really like took it personally. And then when I got older, like my wife is American. And so
Mhm.
like when we first started dating, we go on trips together on the airport and like it was like the first 8 times we went on trips together, 6 times she got called for a random security check. And she was like, in my entire life, I have never been called for a random security check. Then I start dating you and we go to the airport and then 6 out of the last 8 times I'm doing random security screenings. And it was like, huh. And then like it was just like I was at the Chiefs game and everyone is in a room without masks. And the security guard comes up to me and tells me to put on a mask. And I'm just like, look at like there's like 20, 30 people around me without a mask. Like, why do I have to put on a mask? And so I had to put on a mask or else they were gonna kick me out. So I put on a mask. And so it was like I started to realize when I was older that the racism was actually there the whole time. And I just kind of got used to it and didn't notice it. And so I think that's kind of my version of that experience, right? Because obviously, post 9/11, like you have the national media and you have big corporations that are like very I mean, we're going to war with the Middle East. Whenever a country goes to war with another region, they don't like those people. Like that's just what happens in history, right? Like happened in Vietnam, it happens, happened to Japan. Like it is what it is. So we as Middle Eastern people, and you were definitely included in that, right? Because they can't tell the difference between someone from Pakistan and Syria, right? It's like, yeah. So it's like, it's like it's like we were it for a period of time, right? So I think that there was definitely that fabric in the country, but like I didn't notice it until I was an adult and I started to become more aware of the nuances. So yeah, I lived my life mostly oblivious, which is kind of nice. And honestly, it doesn't
Fair.
bother me to this day. It really doesn't. I don't let it bother me. Like I know that there are certain people that don't like me because of where I'm from, or I know people say rude things or treat me poorly for certain reasons. Like whatever, it is what it is. I don't care. Like it doesn't bother me.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, I had my shared troubles with it, and for a long time it bothered me, and it took me probably up into my early 20s to realize, yeah, their opinion doesn't really matter. You know, like it took me a long time, but I got over it, and
Well,
eh,
look at what we talked about 20 minutes ago, right? We say that challenges make you better. So it's
yes,
like if you're given this experience of life, it should make you better.
yeah,
So are you really upset about that? Right? So I
nah,
think that for me is like the frame that really helped me settle with it. It's like, you know what? This just gives me thicker skin. That's a good quality.
yeah. And honestly, I think it's a resilience because like
Yeah.
after that, like I failed so many times, and like schools and other things. And I was like, I got people to prove wrong. Let's just get back up and do it.
Yeah,
And honestly, if I didn't go through that, I probably wouldn't be as strong as I am mentally because of all that. So you're right. It's just that building that 1% better. And life has a tendency to break you down, but also if you choose, keyword choose, it can build you up as well.
totally.
Yeah. But that's about it. So, okay. Last couple of questions, George. What is your legacy, George? What do you want to be remembered for?
Oh man. Okay, so I'll tell a story here. So when I was in dental school, I believe it was Mish passed away,
Yes.
the individual who founded the dental implant. And the dental Facebook communities and the dental online ecosystem in general like blew up. And there was dentist after dentist telling stories about the courage that Carl Mish lived with, how much implants have changed their patients' lives, like just the value of the implant. And I was like, wow, like this guy, he worked really hard and he like yeah, and so then I had that moment, and by this time I think I was already on the Shared Practices podcast, which when I first contacted Richard about the opportunity, I told him, I was like, I actually don't even want to be on air. I would rather you just record the whole thing and like I'm just behind the scenes. And so like I never wanted to be like well known publicly. That was never on my list. But then it just kind of happened that way. And so now I kind of like I'm a very pensive person. So like I'll sit there and think about this type of thing. And the thing that I really want is like, you know, when you're an entrepreneur, business focused dentist, you have this obligation and responsibility to use those powers for good, right? Because it's like, I think that in general, Wall Street pouring in lots of money into our industry, like they really don't care about the things that the dentist cares about, right? We take that oath, right, the Hippocratic oath, and like we make a promise to do right by patients, and that we are in a position of power, and they're trusting our judgment. And so, like, I think that for me, I kind of have like two things that are really important to me in this space. I think the first one is really helping dentists understand how to make money. Like at a nutshell level, I want to really help dentists understand how to earn an income and do well financially. And that's a really important thing to me. The second thing is I genuinely want to, with the fact that I am public in what I'm doing, I would like to set a good example and leave the industry, do my best to leave the industry in a better place than I found it because of some of the things that I've done. So that is when I think about that, that is my answer. But that being said, like I also tend to think that no one's going to give a shit about me if like like if I got hit by a bus tomorrow. I don't think that many people are going to be like their life isn't going to be materially altered. So like I think that I also don't think legacy is a proper term, but when
Mhm.
I do I have had that thought, and that's sort of my answer to the question.
Fair. What would you said legacy would be the term. What would you coin it as then instead?
The impact I want to have. Right? Because
Ah.
I think impact for me, like legacy is about what other people think about me. That's
Hmm.
how I interpret it. And it's like, I'm not so interested in what other people think about me, but I'm more interested in the impact I've had on the industry because I love dentistry. And so I want to have a positive impact on the $170 billion a year industry of dentistry. And like maybe that's brash to call it financial and classify it that way, but like I genuinely, in this ecosystem of dentists in the United States providing dental care services to patients, like, I want to have made a positive contribution. You know, I'm very fortunate. Like Shared Practices Group, like we do a hell of a lot of full arch care. And I think that like I have been at our retreats and we have had patients come in and talk about the impact of All on Four and what it's done to their life. And then I have doctors come in and talk about how fulfilling they are doing All on Four. And so like I've already kind of felt like with the work that I've done in collaboration with my partners, like we've made a really positive impact on our industry. And so I think that like I do think I've done some of that already, but I think that you always want to feel like you're doing good when you're working hard.
So, final two questions. My first question's related to death, and it can be a little bit
Yeah,
morbid, but
love this.
when you die, what do you think it will say on your obituary or your gravestone?
So I'm gonna pivot the question because
Okay.
again, I'm not so interested in like what other people do in relation to me. So like I think one thing about death that I really think about a lot is deathbed optimization. So, like,
Okay.
the moment where you're on your deathbed and it's about to
Hmm.
happen, and the
Hmm.
whole journey of your consciousness is about to end, and you're about to go to sleep and never wake up or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
in that moment, what do I want to be thinking? And I make a lot of my decisions from that place. And the thing that is like kind of a common theme is I want to have left it all out on the field. And so it's like, like I want to feel like I did my best to leave it all out there and do all of the things I wanted to do and experience the life to its fullest potential and feel like I have nothing left to give. I've given it all, and now I'm like kind of that's it. And so, what do I say on the obituary? Like he left it all on the field. He did all he could. Like I don't know, like whatever. That's what I want to be thinking at that moment, right? So like what other people say about me, I'm not so interested.
I respect about you, George. You're like the first person I've spoken to in a while to turn a questioner like that, but it kind of speaks to your entrepreneur mindset. So I respect it. I like it.
You give me two doors, I'll find the third.
I love it. Yes. And then my last question for you: who is George in one word? Only one.
Yeah, I'd say original.
Okay. Why?
Yeah, I think to a fault at times, I really try to look at things through my own lens.
Mm.
And I think that I really like, many times people have brought an argument to me that says so and so does this, so that means blank. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it just doesn't make any sense to me to look at what someone else is doing as justification for what I should do. Like I really so I think I most value original thought and original actions and original concepts and people who can think of something first that's unique and then be original, right? So I think if in one word, I'd pick that one.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Do you have any last parting advice or uh wisdom that you'd like to give the audience?
Well, honestly, I think the last thing I'd like to say is I'd like to, like I have a podcast, right? The Shared Practices podcast. And, I would encourage anyone to kind of listen to our show, hear what we're about. And sharedpractices.com is, another place. And then I'm in the middle of writing a book called Dental Moneyball Zero, which is all about how to get into practice ownership via practice acquisition. It's going to be a massive text, like I'm taking the whole subject and really going deep into it. It's going to be like if you're not interested in the subject, you won't be able to get through the book. And then I have another book. It's my first book called Dental Moneyball, which is how to grow a dental practice. So I think that like in my last thought, I would like to just, if you're interested in some of the things I've said, or if you would like to hear more about any given topic, those are some of the places you can go to learn more.
Awesome. Hey, George, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you taking the time out and even emailing me. Maybe we'll get another chance to do this again. I would really love it.
Yeah.
And for everyone else listening, thank you again for tuning in another episode of Mind Body Roots. Until next time.